explaining David Hume's theory of ideas in 10 minutes. Born on May 7, 1711 in Edinburgh, Scotland, David Hume became the most celebrated of the Scottish Enlightenment philosophers thanks to his most eminent work, a treatise on human nature. The treatise was, for Hume, an attempt to examine human nature in a systematic way comparable to the manner in which Sir Isaac Newton had examined inanimate matter in the late 17th and early 18th century. Newton's methods of discovering laws and principles governing the universe, Hume believed, had to be reflected in the principles of human nature, which should be freed from the a priori speculative thought of his rationalist predecessors in favor of an attempt, he says, to introduce the experimental method of reasoning into moral subjects. Book 1 of his treatise on the understanding formed the foundation of his experimental theory, that which is commonly known as his theory of ideas. Hume begins by specifying that there are two types of perception that present themselves to the mind. These he calls impressions and ideas. Impressions are those perceptions that arise from our immediate experience, whereas the ideas are formed from our rational deliberations about the impressions when they are recalled to the memory. These rational deliberations allow us to form ideas that are simple, meaning that they are composed of the most basic constituents of the impressions, or complex when they constitute an amalgamation of impressions. To this list, we will also add abstract ideas when individual instances of impressions are recalled to make sense of general concepts. To be accurate, though, Hume does not believe that this constitutes the formation of a properly abstract idea in the mind. This general theory Hume largely borrowed from his English predecessor John Locke. Although his insistence on the distinction between impressions, under which he comprehends sensations, passions, and emotions, and ideas, the faint images of these in thinking and reasoning, is original, as is his explanation of abstract ideas, which rejects the notion that any general abstract idea actually presents itself to the mind. The main point is for Hume to emphasize that all of the perceptions of the mind are gained via empirical experience. Nothing is conjured up from reason alone. Furthermore, all of our rational thoughts, which Hume identifies as an assortment of simple ideas, have their origin in corresponding simple impressions. Hume has a purpose here. His theory of ideas is to be applied in an examination of the understanding, the nature of how humans make sense of the world, and in doing so, Hume has the claims of rationalism firmly in his sights. In particular, the metaphysical claims that are formulated in their assessment of abstract ideas that had commonly been supposed to have been derived purely from reason. Since his task is to introduce the experimental method of reasoning into moral subjects, Hume begins his application of the theory of ideas by investigating the notions of time and space, followed by causality. Investigating these abstract concepts so vital to science will aid Hume in defining reason's role in his examination of human nature. With time and space, he is particularly concerned with views that abstract concepts can be surmised purely through the exercise of reason. However, it is Hume's contention that our notions of time and space are formed from perceptions of events where one event follows another and perceptions of objects occupying different locations respectively. We receive no impressions of time and space in themselves and therefore can develop no abstract ideas to account for them. The abstract concept of the infinite divisibility of time and space is also considered for the benefit of considering mathematical constructs. Interestingly, Hume does not doubt that a priori mathematical reasoning is possible. That is because he concedes that reasoning about the meaning of terms can lead us to develop a greater understanding. These are the types of truths that we call analytical. They are true by definition and also exist in logic. For example, the statement all bachelors are unmarried. However, when it comes to the concept of infinity, this cannot be formed as an idea to the mind because all of our impressions are finite. Instead, we are forced to engage in a process where the division of time or space are imagined in their finite parts indefinitely. For Hume, any examination of the mind for an idea of infinity will be fruitless. Instead, one will find only what is found in the investigation of all abstract ideas. Finite ideas drawn from impressions that will be multiplied in the mind until there is no longer an ability to grasp their number. This is the case with infinite divisibility. One may be able to bring the idea of the division of time to the mind and to multiply such an instance, but they will never achieve the idea of infinite division. And so is the case with causality. Hume sees little more than an abstract idea formed by habit from impressions gained via experience of contiguous events. Although we may repeatedly gain the impression of the movement of the red billiard ball every time it is struck by the cue, what we never gain is the impression of causality itself. The idea of causality is instead inferred from the repeated impression of the relation between the events. What is more, Hume asserts that the idea of a causal relationship derived despite a lack of a causal impression cannot be the result of an act of pure reason. We need only recognize the nature of the inference as the result of inductive reasoning to understand why. The fact that day has repeatedly followed night is no indication of the necessity that it will always do so. It is perfectly possible to imagine a circumstance in which it does not. This possibility for Hume is evidence enough that our application of the idea of causality is not dependent upon the fact of causality, but rather the force of habit to believe that our experience of the past can be applied to every instance of the future. However, no such impression or idea exists. At this point, Hume begins to consider the impact of his theory of ideas and its practical implications on his philosophy, particularly regarding skepticism. There is a sense in which Hume most closely appears to design the treatise as a direct confrontation with the rationalism of René Descartes. The fact that he wrote the treatise whilst residing in Descartes' native France should not be lost on us. For it is here that Hume raises doubts about the nature of reason, the existence and understanding of external reality, and the persistence of personal identity. All key topics in Descartes' meditation. Regarding the existence of an external reality, Hume acknowledges that there is little as common to our nature than to assume the existence of a perceptible external reality that we interact and engage with. But he also insists that he can go no further than to admit this belief as owing to our nature. For when we examine the impressions that supposedly arise from our experience of the external world, we see that the world itself is absent. The assumption that the world is the cause of our impressions has not been established by reason, but by our natural inclinations. At this point, it may be worth raising some of our own doubts about Hume's theory of ideas, because although he has expertly devised a coherent system in opposition to rationalism, it is not altogether clear that he has not simply defined rationalism out of existence with an overly restrictive definition of reason. Take, for instance, his insistence that we accept the existence of an external reality through natural inclination. Why is natural inclination or habit not an example of pure reason? For Hume, it is because reason's role is to make logical connections between ideas that expose truths that can be derived from those ideas. But is this reason's only role? Does reason necessitate truth? Is it not reasonable to draw logical inferences that, whilst appearing to be true, turn out to be false? Indeed, the gravitational theory of Newton is an example of such a case. If so, it may be plausible for the rationalist to assert the existence of an external reality derived from pure reason, but that, nevertheless, is not an unquestionable proof of an external reality. So let us summarize what has been established about Hume's theory of ideas. Firstly, we have recognized his commitment to empiricism, the belief that all ideas are formed from experience. We have acknowledged that he separates perceptions of the mind into impressions and ideas, that impressions are the direct result of experience, and that all simple ideas must have their origin in simple impressions. Furthermore, we have accepted that he asserts the possibility of complex ideas built from the imagination from simple impressions. But the target of Hume's theory is abstract ideas. These are the kind that rationalists believe can be conjured from reason alone. For example, the concept of a square that acts as a general example in the mind of all squares. Hume rejects this notion of abstract ideas in favor of the view that particular instances, meaning particular impressions of squares, are applied in a general way when we meet any instance of square. But no abstract idea of a square ever is brought to the mind. Hume applies this theory in a practical way to other presumed abstract ideas concerning time and space and causality, dismissing the notion of these also, until finally he reveals his acknowledgement of the skepticism in his theory. Although his insistence is not a skepticism of reality, but of the means by which it presents itself to the understanding. Hume began by insisting that his task was to introduce the experimental method of reasoning into moral subjects. At first glance, it is difficult to establish whether he has not succeeded in doing the opposite, establishing the futility of the experimental method of reasoning when applied to moral subjects. But this would be to make the same mistake that Hume believes rationalists have made, an over-reliance upon reason to the detriment of empirical investigation. For the key purpose of the theory of ideas and the skepticism that it has led to has been to identify the true role of reason within moral subjects, not as the governing principle of human activity, but as the slave of the passions. And that will be the subject of another video. That's our 10 minutes up for today. It would be great to gain your support, so don't forget to like and subscribe, and ring the bell to be kept up to speed with our regular updates. This has been in 10 minutes. Stay safe until next time.